The government says it's hit its target for 100,000 COVID tests a day. The Health Secretary hailed what he called an audacious achievement and said testing is key to ending the lockdown.
Testing forms the first element of our plan to test, track and trace. Our goal must be freedom.
Also tonight, 3,000 jobs to go at Ryanair as the crisis in the airline industry deepens. As the death toll rises by 739, the tragic story of the brothers who died on the same ward on the same day.
And then he passed, his heart stopped when I was holding his hand. And then later that day, his brother passed opposite him on the ventilator.
And from tattoo parlours to lingerie factories to nature reserves, the unusual places donating PPE to our health workers.
This is the ITV Evening News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good evening. The Health Secretary today hailed the government's success in reaching the 100,000 testing target in the nick of time. Matt Hancock had promised to get there by the end of April. And the latest figures showed more than 122,000 tests were performed in the past 24 hours. But there are question marks over the accuracy of the figures, as it includes home test kits. Well, the Health Secretary said the government will now move to track and trace to drive the infection rate down and help move towards lifting the lockdown. It came as the number of UK deaths rose by 739 to a total of 27,510. Here's our political correspondent, Libby Vina.
Testing as a way of fighting coronavirus was dismissed back in March by some as inappropriate for Britain. But the Health Secretary, when he returned to his desk after falling ill himself, thought otherwise. His target was 100,000 a day, and he says he's got there.
I knew that it was an audacious goal, but we needed an audacious goal because testing is so important for getting Britain back on her feet. I can announce that we have met our goal. The number of tests yesterday, on the last day of April, was 122,347. This unprecedented expansion in British testing capability is an incredible achievement.
He also insisted that there would be a team of 18,000 contact tracers in place within a fortnight.
The combination of contact tracers and new technology through our new COVID-19 NHS app will help tell us where the virus is spreading and help everyone to control new infections.
Then a recognition that the lockdown has been oppressive, albeit necessary. The aim now?
To target the measures that are needed with much more precision. And so to reassert, as much as is safely possible, the liberty of us all.
Some tonight are querying whether his testing figures represent a true picture, given they include home tests sent out rather than completed. One public health expert says what matters is not how many tests are done, but how good community tracing is in practice.
The 100,000 is an absolutely meaningless number. It's devoid of any strategy, and it won't fool the public either.
But the former Health Secretary says today is a significant moment in terms of easing the lockdown.
This unlocks that key and, it will take time to get it up and running, but I think the Cabinet will have choices when they come to deciding about lifting the lockdown that they didn't have before.
Only having the choice of locking down the entire country, some might say, is no choice at all. Health Organisation described trying to combat coronavirus without any testing as like trying to fight a fire blindfold. I think one can safely say that what Matt Hancock has achieved in the last month is to take the blindfold off in Britain and give health officials the chance to actually drill down and finally defeat this disease.
All right, Libby, thank you. Well, whenever the lockdown is lifted, it'll be too late to save thousands of jobs in the airline industry. Ryanair today announced 3,000 pilots and cabin crew are to go as part of a major restructuring programme. The pilots' union warned of a tsunami of job cuts ahead, and Heathrow Airport revealed passenger numbers dropped by 97% last month. Well, that's increased calls for government help, as Juliet Bremner reports.
Expensive assets sitting on the tarmac at Stansted Airport today earning nothing. With most of its fleet grounded, Ryanair has announced sweeping job losses. Their boss, Michael O'Leary, says 3,000 jobs must go. It could be more unless everyone takes a pay cut.
We thought the minimum we needed was 25% job cuts. We said, look, how can we pare that back? And we think it's a combination of lower or smaller job cuts, about 15%, to account for a 30% decline in traffic. But everybody else will have to accept pay cuts.
Passengers have evaporated. The departure hall at Stansted more like a ghost town. Those wanting refunds from Ryanair will have to wait up to 6 months to get them. It's part of an industry-wide crisis. British Airways also warning that its grounded fleet means drastic cuts to come. BA says as many as 12,000 jobs could be at risk and that it may have to leave Gatwick altogether. Virgin's warning it will struggle to survive without a £500 million bailout from the government, which has so far been refused. And Norwegian Air could be on the brink of collapse unless it gets a cash injection. The number of planes using Heathrow plummeted by 97% in April. The chief executive's warning, without a plan to make travel safe again, the industry will be decimated.
We can survive for 12 months with no passengers, but if we got to that point, most airlines would either have gone bankrupt or been nationalised. Many other airports would have closed by that time. That cannot be an acceptable outcome, because aviation is not just another economic sector. It is the cornerstone of the entire UK economy.
He wants to see the same rules applied across the world, probably copying China, where temperature checks and face masks are compulsory. Budget airline Wizz Air has launched a campaign to get passengers back as they began flying from Luton today. But the handful of planes still taking to the skies are virtually empty. And even Ryanair accepts it will probably be next summer before the majority of us fly again. Juliet Bremner, ITV News.
Well, with the economy plunging, businesses are desperate to restart as soon as possible. Burger King has already opened a handful of restaurants, and McDonald's is planning to follow suit. Many other big names are exploring how they can operate within the current lockdown and once restrictions are phased out, as Richard Pallow explains.
Fast food, quick to work out a way of operating again, but not as before. This Reading branch, one of only 12 Burger Kings, open nationally and only for delivery. A business still learning how to socially distance in a tight kitchen, a hugely reduced menu, increased precautions, and despite talks with the government, no certainty.
We get the sense that in the next month or so there will be an easing of restrictions, and what we're trying to do is get ahead of that so that we can reopen and we can take money, which we're beginning to do. In terms of actually making money, I don't think we'll be in any position to make any money until at least the new year.
And now McDonald's has announced it too will reopen the week after next, only though at 15 of its 1,300 UK sites. And again, it's only safe enough for customers to order from home. It has been 42 days since amenities were all forced to close.
Part of what we'll be doing is putting some of the equipment out of action so there's adequate social distancing for people.
Pure Gym, the country's biggest chain, is hoping to restart in a month or two by almost halving the amount of equipment and stations. Demand will have to be spread outside of peak hours, and members will have to clean machines after use.
There will be many people who will think gyms simply can't operate safely.
I'd be misleading you if I said there was zero risk to things. There isn't zero risk anyway. Do I think that we can make a real difference to people's health and well-being on a net basis? Yes, I absolutely am sure we can.
In Ellesmere Port, the production of Vauxhalls can't even get into first gear because showrooms remain shut.
It's pointless building cars and then just parking them in a field. So the plant will restart when the market dictates.
These 2-metre red markings found all over the factory show that Vauxhall, in theory, is ready to reopen, but only when demand for their vehicles is there. And that is the problem, whatever industry you're working in. How do you safely and successfully operate going forward?
Who knows how long the readjustments will be for, but they are better than the alternative. Richard Pallo, ITV News.
Our business editor Joel Hills joins us now from West London. Joel, clearly a challenging time for many businesses. Are the problems in the airline industry indicative of how bad things are across the economy?
Well, look, the aviation sector is clearly at the sharp end of this. Airlines were among the first companies to feel the hits. Ticket sales were collapsing several weeks before the lockdown began officially on March the 23rd. And airlines will be among the last companies to recover as borders reopen and as restrictions are lifted. Now, Ryanair and British Airways are taking the view that it will be years before people are willing and indeed able to fly in the sorts of numbers they were able to before the coronavirus outbreak began. They're laying off unbelievable some numbers of people, and they're asking those that remain to take significant pay cuts, as John Holland Kay was making clear in the report there. If other airlines do the same, it puts massive pressure on airports to do something similar. And the concern here is that all this is happening despite the extraordinary levels of support that are on offer from the government to businesses in distress. It is possible that the much feared scarring of the economy is actually happening already. A recession of sorts is inevitable now. No one knows how large or how long it will last. The hope, though, is that enough businesses survive with enough people to get things going and move up through the gears again as and when the emergency passes. But social distancing is here to stay, and for airlines, for airports, for bars, for pubs, for restaurants and for many shops, that is hugely problematic.
All right, Joel, thank you. The outbreak isn't just destroying businesses, of course, it's also tearing families apart, and there can be few more heartbreaking examples than the deaths of Ghulam Abbas and Razak Ghulam from South Wales. The brothers died on the same day, in the same ward, in the same hospital. Rebecca Barry heard their families' grief.
Brothers Razak Ghulam and Ghulam Abbas. Ghulam, the eldest, at 59. Razak was born a few years after him. But death, delivered brutally by coronavirus, took them both within hours as they lay opposite each other in hospital.
I held his hand and I said, Raz, I love you, baby. I know you fought so hard. 4.5 weeks you fought really hard. And then he passed, his heart stopped when I was holding his hand. And then later that day, his brother passed opposite him on the ventilator.
They were buried together the next day. Ghulam was a taxi driver in Newport. His colleagues performed this drive-by tribute. The family used to run a newsagents in the city and were well known and loved, but only a handful could attend the funeral.
That if there'd been a normal circumstance, there'd have been a massive turnout at the funeral for both of them. They were well respected, well liked and well loved in the community.
Another painful detail. The night Razak was put into a coma, his father died, unrelated to coronavirus.
And my sons, not even 30, and they've buried their dad, their uncle and their grandfather. And it's just so cruel, this disease. It's really cruel. I can't even hug my boys.
This family know too well just how ruthless this disease can be. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News. Meghan loses the first round of her privacy case with the Mail on Sunday, and reunited, the 17-year-old back in her mother's arms after 5 days on a ventilator. Those stories and more after the break. Welcome back. The government's search for protective equipment for frontline workers has been given a boost from some unlikely quarters. A group of volunteers have sourced huge numbers of items from businesses such as distilleries, wildlife centres and even tattoo parlours. In the latest in our series, In This Together, our consumer editor Chris Choi looks at those supporting the national effort.
Personal protective equipment going to a Glasgow care home today. But where this team gets it may surprise you. They've unlocked a hidden supply of vital gear.
The asbestos industry, distilleries, fisheries, oil and gas, and the construction industry, even artists and museums.
Volunteers are finding PPE held by companies not connected to the usual health supply chain. So far, 200,000 items, often in unlikely places. The shortage of PPE has led to an international search, and yet it turns out there are thousands of items much closer to home and often in unexpected places like this. This jewellery business found 5,500 PPE items, normally used for tattoos and piercings.
By donating even a small amount of anything you have it just benefits the people that really need it, whether that's, physically being protected or just that mental well-being of knowing you're being protected.
PPE has come from swimwear and lingerie firms who donated goggles and masks. Kit came from a snowboard maker and even from this Yorkshire moor. Here, gloves and masks used in conservation were given, and staff think if they had useful gear, others will have too.
Whilst it's in storage, there's people who really need it, the NHS who really need it, our local communities really need it. So I'd say have a dig around from what you've got and see what could be useful.
There have been desperate global appeals and international negotiations, but it turns out some unused PPE is much closer to home. Chris Choi, ITV News.
Couples whose IVF treatment is on hold will be able to resume it soon, the government has announced. The regulator ordered most treatments to stop by the middle of last month, but appointments will now be allowed to resume from the 11th of May. Pharmacies are being encouraged to join a scheme to help domestic abuse victims get help. Their private consultation rooms will be available to anyone who asks and provide ways to contact support services. All 2,400 boot stores have signed up. And the Welsh Government says it will pay all care workers in Wales a £500 bonus. It will go to around 64,000 staff in care homes and those who care for people in their own homes. The publisher of the Mail on Sunday has won the first round of its bitter court battle with the Duchess of Sussex. A High Court judge threw out some of Meghan's claims against associated newspapers over its publication of a private letter she wrote to her father. But the case is far from over. Our royal editor, Chris Shipp, joins me now from Surrey. Chris, what did the judge say?
Well, let's be clear, this was not how the Duchess of Sussex's legal team wanted this one to go. Now, you probably know that the letter that she sent to her father shortly after the royal wedding, a private letter, was published by the Mail on Sunday about 6 months afterwards. There was a trial hearing at the High Court last week. We all dialed into it remotely, as is the way these days. And the judge today ruled that he was striking out, as it's known, 3 of Meghan's claims. 1, that the newspaper acted dishonestly. 2, that it deliberately stirred up the relationship, the problems between her and her father, and that it had an agenda to paint her in a negative light. We had a response from Meghan's legal team today, and they said that whilst the judge recognises there is a claim for breach of privacy and copyright, we are surprised to see that his ruling suggests that dishonest behaviour is not relevant. And I should be clear that the privacy case continues. It may well be the case that Meghan and her father will have to testify in person. We shall see. But as far as this one goes, it's round 1 to the Mail on Sunday.
All right, Chris, thank you. The bosses of all 20 Premier League football clubs met today and reconfirmed their intention to finish the season. A plan called Project Restart could see all of the remaining matches played in June and July. They would be played in a small number of neutral stadiums with no fans, but the club stressed it won't happen without government approval. And finally, we end tonight with a heartwarming story of survival. 17-year-old Lily Kitcher is now safely back home after spending a week on a ventilator. The teenager was clapped out of Eastbourne Hospital and into the arms of a grateful mother who, as a nurse, understood only too well how lucky she was. Paul Davies reports.
Lily Kitcher will never forget the doctors and nurses who applauded her as she finally left the critical care unit of Eastbourne Hospital.
She's had a very big round of applause from all the hospital.
Thanks to their efforts, the 17-year-old student who'd spent a week with a ventilator helping to keep her alive was finally able to enjoy the most emotional of reunions with her mum, Trudy. Today, back home together, Lily recalled what COVID-19 feels like.
Not being able to breathe or drowning.
And those who'd helped her through.
It was really scary, but I remember always feeling safe. The nurses and the doctors were just amazing, and it was really strange not being able to see their faces.
Mum Trudy, herself a nurse, recalls feeling helpless.
I got as far as in the ambulance with her to A&E, and unfortunately the ambulance driver obviously had to say to me I couldn't go any further, and I was the one in bits, not Lily.
Both say the reunion was a magical moment, and Lily has a message for young people bored with the lockdown and tempted to break it.
It's really not worth it. It really isn't worth it. Like, seeing your friends and that really can wait.
Lily will return to college when life returns to normal and will always be grateful to those who made that possible. Paul Davies, ITV News.
And that is all for now. Tom is here later with news at 10. But from me and all the team, good evening and take care.